Welcome to the Reddit Chronicles. Today we will be reading from Malicious Compliance. Our first post is by Resident Device. Act like a jerk, pay the stupid tax. Way back in the late 1990s, during some of my high school years, I worked at a location of the restaurant chain prophesized in Demolition Man to one day be the victor of the fast food wars, along with several other buddies from school. In those days, one could purchase a taco in hard or soft shell form for 79 cents. It was the same then as it is now. Shell, meat, lettuce, cheese. If you wanted the supreme version, which added tomatoes and sour cream, it cost 99 cents. If you wanted to add sour cream to any menu item, it was a 25-cent upcharge. Many people would come in and order a taco with sour cream added, and generally, we would repeat it back as a taco supreme no tomatoes, knowing that ringing it up this way saved the person 5 cents. Shocking life hack most people don't know. If anyone asked, we'd explain why we rung it up that way, and most folks were cool about it. But sometimes, and sadly more frequently than one would hope for, you'd have the jerks who just couldn't comprehend things like logic. That's not what I ordered, etc. Nowadays, I believe they would be called Karens. Back then, we just called them the C word. When we encountered those people, it wasn't worth my barely minimum wage time to try and explain things like economics or basic math to people. Way above my pay grade. So we'd just say, sorry about that, I'll correct it, and ring it up exactly how they ordered. Widely known as the stupid tax. Yeah, it's entirely petty and mostly insignificant when it was only 5 cents per taco. But we were teenagers working part-time at Taco Bell. What do you expect? Our next post is by Plexi Furus. Karma is a bee, and so was she, cross-posted elsewhere. It being Christmas time reminded me of a story from quite a few years ago, from when I was a bartender in a corporate-style cookie-cutter restaurant. I mostly worked nights but had one regular mid-shift on Fridays. We were always super busy at the bar for lunch on Fridays, and usually had quite a few of the mall workers coming in to eat, then head back to work. Nearly every Friday, the same smug, borderline rude lady came in for lunch. Every time she paid exact change. 0 tip. Maybe half the time she would complain over some minor inconvenience, and more than a few times got a comped meal. The more I had to wait on her, the more indignant and pissed I got. So around Christmas time, I was out and about in the mall buying for family and friends. Picked out something nice for my girlfriend at the time. A sheer top which I thought would look amazing on her. Decently priced with it being on sale too. Walking up to the cashier, I was a bit surprised to run into resting bee face. Whatever. In street clothes, I felt like she barely registered who I was, or maybe she really didn't care who was at her register. Maybe both. So I hand her a $20 bill. She examines it for a moment, turned it over twice, held it up to the light even. Then, out comes the counterfeit pen marker. Thinking to myself, a bit excessive. Change should have been around $1 and change. Surprisingly, she hands out $81 plus change. She calls next in line, so I step to the side for a moment in contemplation. I could honestly feel the devil on one shoulder and angel on the other. Took me a moment or two, but I finally let my moral compass win and stepped back in front of the register. I nicely explained that there was a mistake made, but before I could continue, she shot me down and briskly told me in a semi-professional tone to get the F out. So I did. The way I look at it, all those lost tips and the money she just gifted me was just karma. Sucked to be her, I guess. Our next post is by Swirl Masta. Sorry, you told me to leave you alone. When I was around 15 or 16, a friend and I went to the local mall on the weekend to hang out and hit the arcade. After a bit, we decided to get a drink at the food court. While we were standing in line, an older man, late 30s or early 40s, looking like he just got out of the gym, decided to cut in the line in front of us. The line was fairly long at this point, around 10 deep. They had the best lemonade in the mall. I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Sir, we're in line here." He shot us a look and turned back around, pretty much ignoring the fact that we were there. When he got nearer to the register, he reached into his pocket to take out his wallet. As he did so, a wad of cash fell onto the floor unnoticed by him. As rude as he was, I was raised to be courteous and respectful. I picked up the cash and said, "Excuse me, sir." At which point he replied, without even turning to look at me, "Shut up and leave me the F alone." I turned back to look at the older gentleman behind us who just smiled and shrugged. So I placed the cash in my pocket. When it was time for him to pay, he opened his wallet to discover that there was no cash in it. He quickly turned and scanned the floor. When he didn't find the money, he asked us if we'd seen him drop it. My friend said, "Can't help you. We were told to shut up and leave you the F alone." He was a bit spicy, he ranted, but in the end he walked away without his money. Turned out there was $147 in there. A nice haul for a broke kid in the early 90s. Another time, when I was just a little older, I had gone to Wally World. I purchased something fairly inexpensive and paid the cashier. She handed me back around $87 in change. I said, "Ma'am, I think you gave me the wrong change." She looked at it and told me that she had it right. I responded, "But ma'am," she cut me off, spitting mad, and went into a rant about how she was very good at math. I let her finish and simply said, "Okay, sorry to bother you, ma'am." I then took my leave. I wonder how she felt about her math skills when she counted her drawer after her shift. What I was trying to tell her was that I had paid with a 20, not a Benjamin. Our next post is by Carl. Employer only paid us on time if we faxed our timesheets. This happened about 10 years ago when I was working on the railways near London. I worked for an agency which supplied staff to the railways on a temporary basis. They were very old-fashioned, and as part of our employment contract they stated that our hand-completed timesheets had to be faxed by 7 p.m. on the Thursday for us to be paid on the Friday. Timesheets that were emailed even before 7 p.m. would result in wages not being paid until the following Friday. Obviously they chose the most inconvenient way, as it was 2014 and nobody had a fax machine, so that they were able to legally retain our wages in their account for an extra week. But my printer at home had a fax machine built in that I never used. So after my first week, I plugged in my printer to the phone line, faxed my timesheet to the agency and waited. The next day, I still hadn't been paid. So I phoned them and asked why I hadn't been paid, but the response was explained in a dull voice by somebody who had obviously repeated the same sentence so many times that it had lost all meaning to her. Here's our conversation. As explained in your contract, only timesheets that have been faxed to us are paid the next day. If you've emailed it, your wages will be paid the following week. I replied, "But I did fax it." She gathered her thoughts for a moment before replying, "Oh, okay, which number did you fax it to?" So I gave her the number I faxed it to, which was correct. Okay, I'll just place you on hold." She came back on the phone a couple of minutes later. "Okay, yes, we've got it. Sorry. I can't remember the last time somebody actually faxed their timesheet to us. I'll get that paid now." As you can imagine, I told my colleagues the following day, and from then on, they all gave their timesheets to me to fax when I got home, so they got paid on time. At the time, I wondered if they'd dropped the silly fax versus email rule, but it continued, and so every week I'd fax in half a dozen timesheets to them. Our next post is by Smock. Manager told me to call the person of the computer I was working on, so I did. Cross-post from tech support. I was sitting in my office one slow day, and the CEO walked in. Always a pucker moment, even though I'm on very good terms with him, and he handed me an obviously non-business laptop and asked if I could get it back up and running, as it had very important thing on it that was needed shortly, and as I wasn't doing anything and he still signed my paycheck, I said, "You got it, sir." Later, a middle manager comes in and asks me to do something, and I say, "You're number 2 in line," and pointed to the obviously not corporate laptop I was fixing. Manager didn't like that much and demanded I call whoever and tell them that it wasn't acceptable for me to be working on personal equipment. So I pulled out my cell and called. Manager could only hear my half of the convo, but what he heard was something like, "Hey Tom, I got Bob here telling me it isn't acceptable for me to be working on your personal stuff, and he wanted me to call you and tell you." "Oh sure, he's right here, hang on." And I handed the phone to the manager. The manager started off saying, "It's not acceptable." And then his eyes got real big, and the rest of the conversation was, "Yes sir," and "No sir." He hung up and thundered, "Why didn't you tell me it was CEO's laptop?" And I said, "You didn't give me a chance," and demanded I call them right now. Thank you for listening to the Reddit Chronicles. Follow for more content.